Yeah. In a recent podcast, you mentioned how Alan Greenspan said one of his biggest concerns as Fed chair, and even today, is inflation. And he would monitor the price of gold as sort of a gauge to tighten or loosen monetary policy. So, fast forward today, Jerome Powell's concern is also inflation. Do you think Fed Chair Powell watches the price of gold? And if he does, what is the price of gold whispering or screaming at him right now?
Well, he's never mentioned that he watched it. This was my most recent podcast that you're referring to. And so if you don't know about my podcast, check me out at schiffradio.com is the podcast. My YouTube channel, Schiff Report. We put them up there as well. But I was watching Greenspan interviewed on CNBC. And specifically, he told CNBC that his greatest concern was inflation. That's what he was worried about. But it's ironic because that's also Powell's concern, but for the opposite reason. Powell says we don't have enough inflation, we want more. And Greenspan is like, I'm worried we already have too much. And so if Greenspan is right, and why should Greenspan be any less credible? I mean, he used to be the Fed chairman, so why isn't his view just as likely to be correct as the current chairman, Powell? But if Greenspan is right, then Powell is just throwing gasoline on the fire that Greenspan is already concerned about. But the part about gold is I remember when Greenspan was Fed chairman and gold was trading at about $350 an ounce. Right now we're just under 2,000, right? 1950. But he used to talk about $300 and $400 gold. And what he used to say publicly was that if gold price went down to 300, he knew that he was too tight. And if gold got up towards 400, he knew he was too loose. And so he would use the price of gold as a signal, a market signal, as to whether or not he had the right monetary policy. So if you saw the price of gold going up too much, hey, I'm creating too much inflation, I better raise rates, tighten policy. And if gold went down, oh, we're too tight, right? So he was looking at gold. But ever since Greenspan left, nobody gives a damn about the price of gold. And so I don't think Powell even cares or even appreciates the significance of $2,000 gold. And I don't think he's worried about $3,000 gold or $4,000 gold. He should be. I think if he knew as much about as Greenspan does, I think Greenspan has a much better understanding of economics and money than any of the Fed chairmen that have succeeded him. So I think his outlook has actually a lot more credibility than either Bernanke, Yellen, or Powell.
Peter, is the money printing the root cause of all the economic and social problems we see today, like the increasing wealth gap, the ever-rising real inflation, and big government, etc.?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say that it's the Fed and inflation that is to blame for everything, but it's certainly a very large contributing factor. But obviously, it takes, two to tango. And so the Fed has had a lot of help from the government in general, Congress and the president. They have passed a lot of laws. Now, you can argue that a lot of this spending might not have taken place, but for the willingness of the Fed to finance it, to monetize it, to artificially restrain interest rates. So the Fed has done its part. But of course, Congress didn't have to act so recklessly and irresponsibly. Just because the Fed was pouring alcohol, they didn't have to drink it. So the government has done a lot, and of course, the public, the public voted for these guys, so we can't let the American public off the hook for their share of the blame, right? So there's plenty of blame to go around, but I do think that the principal blame would go on the Fed. I think that because the Fed could have done its job and really reined in a lot of the other branches. In fact, I actually blame the judicial system too, because a lot of what the Congress has done, a lot of the government spending and programs and regulations are actually unconstitutional. And a lot of this stuff should have been struck down by the courts. But these guys are asleep at the switch. They don't really understand the Constitution. They don't apply it to the government the way the founding fathers intended. So, so many different, aspects of our government have let us down. The judiciary, the legislature, the executive, all three branches, and then, of course, the Federal Reserve, which isn't even a branch. It's really independent. So Yeah, I mean, it's been a real disaster. And probably if we could get rid of one a year, it'd be 1913, because that's not only when we got the Federal Reserve, but we also got the income tax. And so, working hand in glove, both the inflation tax and the income tax have really undermined America's standard of living, economic growth, stature in the world. So it's really unfortunate that we went down that path. Of course, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I don't believe that there was any. It was a devious plot, but unfortunately, every time you give the government some power, they abuse it. And so they've had 100 years now to abuse this power, more than 100 years. And it's not just that, yeah, they got the camel's nose in the tent. Now it's not just the camel, but we got a whole herd of camels in this tent, and it, stinks pretty bad.
Okay. There's often the phrase that the Fed put the punch bowl in front of Wall Street and they can't take the punch bowl away. Now we sort of see the punch bowl in front of Main Street. Will that punch bowl, will it ever be able to be taken away from Main Street?
Well, I've been describing it now not as a punch bowl, but as a swimming pool. I mean, that's how much punch is there. And I don't even know if there's any punch in there. At this point, it's pure alcohol that we're swimming in, and yeah, it's everywhere. But no, they can't, unless they want to do the responsible thing and admit, of course, that everything they've done in the past was reckless and irresponsible and wrong. See, the Fed can't do the right thing without admitting that everything else it's done in the past has been wrong. But it's very reluctant to do that, if it even understands that at all. I mean, that's the problem. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. All the Fed ever does is create inflation. They print money, they lower interest rates. And what does that get us? It gets us a bubble that pops. And now they have to blow up a bigger bubble that pops, and they have to try to blow up a bigger one. But in the meantime, they are undermining the actual health of the U.S. economy, right? They're making the problems they're trying to solve worse with the very policies that they continue to implement, because they refuse to admit, or they don't even understand, that they're lighting the fires that they're trying to put out with the same material that set the fires, right? It's gasoline, right? And so I don't know if they're ever going to realize this until they just get burned, which is what's going to happen. But unfortunately, it's the country. It's not just these wildfires out west, but I mean, the whole country is going to be torched by this monetary policy when the dollar crashes.
Looking back at China's rise in the past decades, it's become it was a low-cost factory of the world, exporting more than it imported, and its currency was still relatively weak. Now, when you say that America is heading into bankruptcy, do you see a sort of reversal of economic fortunes where maybe countries like China will be an even stronger consumer, hands down, than the U.S., and the U.S. will have to go back to sort of being a manufacturing mecca with a weaker U.S. dollar?
Yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen. I mean, the America's ride on the Chinese and global gravy train is going to come to an end. We have enjoyed the exorbitant privilege of living beyond our means, consuming without producing, right? Borrowing without saving. That's all been made possible by the magic of the U.S. dollar being accepted as the world's reserve currency. I've basically used the analogy of an individual with a checkbook. And imagine you have a checkbook that has an unlimited amount of checks in it, but you don't actually have to have any money in the bank. And whatever you want to buy, you just write a check. And the people who accept the check, they don't care that you don't have any money in the bank, because they never try to cash the check. They just hold on to it. And they circulate it, as money with other people who are willing to accept your checks, without ever, going to the bank to cash them. So if you could live off an infinite number of checks with nothing in the bank, you live pretty good. You just buy whatever you want. You don't have to make anything. You don't have to do anything. And that's really what America does. We send the world these IOUs. We send out dollars, and the world doesn't take the dollars and try to buy stuff here. They just hold on to them. They invest them in treasuries or in stocks or mortgages. And so they bid up our financial assets. So it helps make stock prices go up and real estate prices go up, but it keeps consumer prices low. So Americans think they're rich as they watch asset prices go up, as they keep borrowing stuff that they didn't produce, and we go deeper and deeper into debt. But this is setting us up for a major crash. The dollar is going to collapse, and then we're not going to be able to continue to import the stuff that everybody else makes by just printing money. And people think that we are doing the world a favor, that somehow we're the engine of growth because we're doing the consumption. They actually have it backwards. We're the caboose of growth because we're doing the consumption. What drives the economic growth train is production, right? What really makes a consumer is their ability to be a producer. You have to produce first, and then you consume second. We got the cart before the horse. What's going to happen when the dollar tanks? The rest of the world, in particular like China, instead of producing stuff and sending it to America so that Americans can buy it, they're going to produce stuff and leave it in China so the Chinese can buy it. So the Chinese are going to keep their stuff and Americans are going to keep their paper money, right? Well, the stuff is a lot more valuable than the paper. So we're going to have lots of paper and no stuff, and they're going to have a lot more stuff and less paper. So their gain is our loss, and that's what's coming. And, guys like Trump, who are beating up China don't understand this. They don't understand the huge subsidy. They point to these trade deficits, and yes, they're correct. And the trade deficits are bigger now than ever before under Trump. They're bigger than they were under Obama. And they are bad. Trump was right to criticize the problem. But we didn't understand is it's like a drug. Long term, it's hurting us. But in the short run, it makes us feel good. So these big trade deficits are undermining our economy, but they make us feel good because we get to consume the stuff that we didn't produce. And Trump doesn't realize that in order to fix the trade deficit, we have to have a big recession and Americans have to stop consuming, save more and produce more. And so the transition from the bubble economy that Trump inherited and continues to nurture and the real economy that he promised to build by making America great again, between those two, there is a severe recession, but Trump didn't want to preside over that. So instead of trying to make America great again, his main goal was to keep the bubble going and to make the bubble greater than the one he inherited.
Peter, what happens with the U.S. military when America is bankrupt? Will it cease to be the police of the world?
Well, we won't be able to afford to be the police of the world. Look, what happened to the Soviet Union's military when the Soviet Union collapsed? I mean, it's nothing like it used to be. Yes, Russia still has a military, but not like the Soviet Union. And Russia's influence has, diminished dramatically. I mean, it's not the Soviet Union. We don't have that huge power anymore, not over Europe, but over the entire world. So, yes, I mean, I think that, America is the sole remaining superpower once, the Soviet Union collapsed, but America's collapses is inevitable. And when it does, we're going to be forced to tighten our belt. And I actually think that's a good thing. I mean, we have too big a presence. We have too many troops all over the world. We're spending too much money on warfare, right? I don't think it's defense. I think it's offense. And some people, I think a best offense is a good defense. And that's, kind of real we need to be, just defend the United States. We don't have to defend the entire world. The world can take care of itself. But we're not going to be able to afford it. We're not going to be able to supply the troops or pay the troops. I mean, so we're going to have to bring them home, and we're going to have to seriously cut back on military spending. But we're going to have to cut back on domestic spending too. In fact, hopefully, I want to see domestic spending reduced even more because I think the majority of what the federal government spends money on should be on national defense. So that's really what I want the federal government to do. Constitutionally, that's its mandate. That's its mission. Domestic affairs are supposed to be handled by the states. And so they're the ones that are supposed to spend money domestically. The federal government should be spending probably 80, 90% of its money on the defense of this nation and leave the rest to the states or to the people. So, we could dramatically reduce government spending and still accomplish that, but then even more dramatically reduce all the other spending. But again, that means there's a rude awakening for a lot of Americans who are living off of government pensions, who are expecting or currently collecting Social Security, Medicare, Obamacare. They're going to have to be told that there's no money to pay these promises. The government's broke. The only way they can pay is with worthless money. But what good is being paid worthless money? But that's what might happen.
Yeah, worthless money should have stayed backed by gold. Peter, do you think gold will return as the primary monetary reserve? And I'm asking this because fiat currencies, they give governments the unconstrained ability to print as much money as they want, spend as much money as they want. Why would politicians and governments want to give that up?
Well, it's not about wanting to give it up. It's going to be about having to give it up, right? I mean, that's when their backs are to the wall and they don't have a choice, that's what's going to happen. I mean, once the public loses confidence in a fiat monetary system, how do you reinstill that confidence? I mean, gold is the answer. And what I think is going to happen before the United States goes on a gold standard, because obviously I think we have the least amount of incentive to do that, right? Because, the dollar is being used instead of gold. So, but what I think is going to happen is all the other nations of the world that have been using the dollar instead of gold will just start using gold again instead of the dollar. Go back to the way it was before the dollar replaced gold as the primary reserve. And again, you have to remember, the reason that we were able to convince the world to switch from gold to dollars is because the dollar itself was not only backed by gold, but redeemable on demand in gold. So the dollar was as good as gold. And in fact, it was better because you could take your dollars and then loan them to the US government by buying treasuries. And now you got interest, right, which you didn't get on your gold. So they had the best of both worlds. They had gold and they had interest. And so this is what happened. But of course, we abused that privilege and we started printing too much money. And then we defaulted on our commitment to pay real money for our IOUs, to pay gold for Federal Reserve notes. The dollar was marked down, but it wasn't, knocked out. I mean, the world continued to accept dollars and hold them as the reserve, just at a lower exchange rate than the one that prevailed previously. There was a big drop in the dollar during the 70s against the Deutschmark, the Swiss franc, the yen. Gold, of course, was revalued, or as the dollar went down, gold went from $35 an ounce to $850. Oil prices went from $3 a barrel to $30 a barrel because we devalued the dollar by severing its link from gold. And so now we had a dollar backed by nothing as opposed to a dollar backed by something. But of course, in addition to having the dollar as good as gold in 1971, back at that time, or even before that, rather, when Bretton Woods was enacted, right after the Second World War, America was by far the most powerful economy in the world. Industrially, we were the biggest manufacturer and exporter of manufactured goods. I mean, all the cars, all the consumer electronics, all the appliances, right? All the stuff that's now made in Germany or Japan. Of course, they made nothing back then because they were decimated in the war. We owned all of those big industries. So anybody in the world that wanted something had to buy it from America. We made everything. We had the strongest economy. We paid the highest wages. We were the world's biggest creditor nation. Everybody around the world owed us money. We had investments all around the world. We were collecting income on those investments. Biggest creditor nation on the planet. And we had almost all the gold, right? Today, fast forward 2020, the biggest debtor nation on the planet. We owe more money than all other debtor nations combined. We owe money to everybody. Our industrial base is imploded. All the industries we used to dominate, we've lost. And now we're importing with IOUs what we used to produce ourselves, not only produce enough for our own consumers, but enough for the rest of the world. Now we're just importing what everybody else produces. And we're printing money like crazy. Powell is saying that we need more inflation. Interest rates are at zero as far as the eye can see. The Fed's not even thinking about raising interest rates. We don't have enough inflation. So they're going to destroy the dollar. So you're a foreign central bank and you're like, all right, our currency is backed by what? By the dollar? What's that backed by? Nothing. And they're just going to keep printing them and printing them and printing them because if they stop, the whole house of cards in America comes collapsing down. The only way to stop the stock market, the real estate market, the bond market, the whole economy from imploding is to keep debasing the dollar and creating inflation. You can't do that and be the reserve currency. So the world is going to leave the dollar. Just like America went off the gold standard, the world is going to go off the dollar standard. Now, a lot of people think, well, that's never going to happen because, hey, how do you go off the dollar standard? Because what currency replaces the dollar? You can't use the euro or you can't use the yen. Yes, I get that. But what these guys miss is that you don't need another currency to replace the dollar. Why repeat that mistake and just give another country the ability to abuse the privilege, right? That America abused. Just go back to gold. We don't need a reserve currency. We need reserve money. Currency needs to be backed by real money, and that's gold, right? And that's what's going to happen. So gold's going to be remonetized. But before it does, buy it. Buy it now before all the central banks are competing to buy it. Buy it now before all the big pension funds and hedge funds and the endowments and all these guys are loading up on gold because they don't have any yet, and they're going to have to buy it. And the price is going to be much, much higher because we can't go back on a gold standard at $2,000 gold. It's impossible. Not unless the price of everything else crashes, which could happen, but I doubt. So instead of having the price of everything else collapse, the easiest path is just for the price of gold to go up, and that's exactly what's going to happen.